And I am from the museum field, although partially retired, and I can only say that part of the future of Judaism in Europe is to learn from our past. This is, of course, an oratio in favor of my trade, but I strongly believe that we have to offer a lot, and I think that should be the lesson of the exhibition in the Palazzo Ducale, where many exhibits can be readily transformed or transferred to the new Jewish museum, which will be built in the ghetto. The connection between Amsterdam and Venice, I must apologize, has been mostly active in the end of the 16th and the beginning of the 17th century, going a bit into the 18th century with the figure of Saraval. Of Saraval, we have in the Amsterdam holdings a beautiful translations of Handel's oratorium Esther, which has been performed, and maybe it should be performed one day in the ghetto. But that's all to bless you. The important lesson that we can learn from the relation Amsterdam-Venice, I can summarize in 4 headlines. And they all go back to that earlier period, so I apologize that it's not, again, the 18th or the 19th century. They go back to 4 points: trade, network, education, and organization. It has been the trade of Venice which enabled Venice and which enabled the Jewish community here to flourish. When the trade of Venice went down at the end of the 16th century, or probably early already, by the hands of the Portuguese, if you read the Portuguese histories of the world, you can see how they, in the Portuguese way, tried to kick out the Venetians from several trade posts. And it's these Portuguese which are, of course, the main key in the connection between Amsterdam and Venice, because they were here and they were in Amsterdam. They were here and they were there, and some of them knew each other. But of course, there was also a competition between Venice and Amsterdam in trade, although much more between Amsterdam and the Iberian Peninsula, the Luso-Iberian Society. That was the big competition with the complications of the war between the Dutch, the new Dutch Republic, and Spain. So trade was a road to go in between. Trade creates network, and network creates trade. And a lot of networking was done by the New Christians, by the Portuguese tradesmen of Amsterdam, including their connection to Venice. Now, when was this connection used? And where is it mostly visible? I believe it's mostly visible in Amsterdam, and it's mostly visible in the Portuguese community, which of course today still has a lot of glory, but in its scope it has become much smaller. It is, however, probably also visible or hearable in the language of the Dutch Jews, all of them using probably a way of pronunciation of the Hebrew ayin, ngayin, which they may have taken from here, and which the Ashkenazim also took. So if you still hear, which is very rare because we have all been influenced by the blessings and the non-blessings of Lubavitch, you can hear that distinct language remnant. Trade and networking created the relationship. And so, when a tradesman, Rabbi Pardo, came to Amsterdam after his trade failed and he became a rabbi, he brought a lot to Amsterdam. For instance, he brought Dotar, the society to provide women, young women, at that time, hopefully at this time much less, a very vulnerable part of the population, of which other studies are in progress, about how women were sent away from home by Jewish families in Germany and Holland and then had to figure it out themselves. The Portuguese were very much aware that they had to take care of these women. And this chevra, this society, was modeled after a Venetian one which existed already. Also, it was modeled, in fact, after a Catholic society to which the Venetians had looked. So this Dotar, which last year celebrated its 400th anniversary, became one of the high points of the Amsterdam Portuguese community, in status, in how they acted, but also in what they took care of. They really took care of a large segment of people, of women. Today they also take care of boys who were without any chance. And that in the whole known world at the time, being from the Iberian Peninsula to the new colonies in Brazil and in the Caribbean. So the Dotar influence is important, and it comes from Venice. Other beneficial societies were founded in early Amsterdam, like the one that took care of the captivos, which was also a very popular thing. And if you think on and think into the future, of course, Jewish communities do take care of other Jewish communities. First of all, Israel, probably a little bit less, but it is a very good model. These captivos were people that were caught by the Inquisition, and money was assembled by the society to free them. It also came after a Venetian model. Last, Terra Sancta, the Holy Land, very normal in Jewish communities before Zionism. And Terra Sancta probably provided with a long-term connection to Venice. When a shaliach from the Holy Land would come to Europe, he usually would start probably in southern Europe, but then would come to Venice and from there to Amsterdam. So I've had the trade, the network, and part of the organization. In the organizational part, it wasn't only this chevrot, these beneficial societies that were founded and that flourished. Also, the community as such was modeled after the model of Venice. And in this modeling, it went very far, because the rabbis that came, especially Pardo, and later Sol Levi Mortera, we saw his name in the exhibition, and of course he's very known, played a huge role in the founding of the Amsterdam community. Mortera played his role, first of all, because he was a very strong person. He came in a strange way to Amsterdam because he was the assistant of a physician, Montalto. Montalto was a physician of Maria de Medici, and Mortera was his assistant, his teacher, because Montalto became Jewish. When he suddenly died in, I believe, in 1616, Montalto, Mortera decided that he should be buried in the Jewish cemetery and brought him to Amsterdam, where he was buried in the cemetery in Ouderkerk. Again, an organizational feature which was important because the cemetery of the Portuguese community, the first one near Alkmaar, was created by the power of Garcia Pimentel, who came from here, and the one in Ouderkerk was by a younger generation of Pimentel, also one that came from Venice to Amsterdam. It was founded. So organizational also meant more. And Professor Kalimani already mentioned Spinoza, and in that framework, I think it's important to mention that at a certain moment, when there was a split in one of the two communities of Portuguese Jews in Amsterdam, the first one was founded in 1603, and the second one in 1608, and Pardo was the rabbi of the first one, and Mortera joined him. They had a big fight, a big conflict, and this conflict is probably one of the things at the cradle of the conflict with Spinoza, because they went to the rabbis for their conflict, but Mortera possibly made a mistake. He also went straight to the civil authorities in Amsterdam. And going to the civil authorities meant immediately you're trespassing. You're not going out of the ghetto. There was no ghetto in Amsterdam, but you certainly went over a border and you left Jewish autonomy, which was fought so hard for and was one of the bases of the Amsterdam community. It was at the same time the basis, and it was also something that never really existed. Because if you look at Amsterdam as the capital of modern Jewish times, you can see that very early on, in all kinds of civil deals, they went to the civil authorities. For example, when someone got married and there had to be a marital prenuptial agreement, they thought it's better to go to a notary public and to be sure that everything has been written down. Now, what happened to Mortera? He went to Venice to ask for advice. Again, there was a split in the community Beit Jacob, and they had a fight about to whom belongs what. A very simple fight. It looked like that. It could also very well have been a fight over the influence of Kabbalah, of mysticism, because the young Amsterdam community, and here we come, I'm sorry, I'm very chauvinistic, had another trait. These people were not Jews. They had to become Jews. And there was one big mirror on the laguna where they could learn it. It was here, because here there was Judaism, and it had a long tradition, 200 years, and it had experience in receiving strangers and even Portuguese, and what to do with these refugees, with these people that came from Iberia, Luso-Iberian Peninsula, that wanted to be Jews. Could you trust them? What would you allow to let them do? And for instance, prayer books in Spanish. Spanish was the prayer language that was allowed by one of the Venetian rabbis, while Portuguese remained for trade purposes. This judgment came from here and was applied in Amsterdam. So in the organizational segment of the four I have said, one I will get onto, I had trade, network, organization, and education. And organization and education are closely connected. There was a big lesson from Venice, how to deal with new Jews, how to deal with people that want to convert back. Now, it is for sure that a man as Mortera, who was very strict in his Jewish convictions, in the way he professed Judaism, and who was, as you know here, of course, a pupil of Leon Modena, Mortera went very far and was very strict. There were others in Amsterdam, like Manasseh ben Israel, who was probably less strict, but both of them worked very hard in the education of the new Jewish community and built the possibilities to do it, especially by creating this year into 16 as well as your anniversary, but 100 years later, the famous Eitz Chaim Library, which my successor will open next Sunday, a beautiful exhibition in the Jewish Museum in Amsterdam. We can get back to that. In any case, in organizational things, Mortera played a role because he set a religious paradigm. It was probably stronger than that of Manasseh. In the fight they had on the split of the community, Mortera brought back a verdict which was in his favor. Then everything flew in his face because he had gone to the civil authorities and they ruled the other way around and he had to follow it. But he also must have brought already a judgment which was most likely made here, which later, much later, 50 years, was pronounced against Spinoza. So here we have another thing that came from here and that was transferred to Amsterdam. This is, of course, vague. What definitely wasn't vague is that the Amsterdam community had a lot of strange birds in its flock, and they had to keep them together, which they did, sometimes by threatening, a lot according to Joseph Kaplan, by threatening them with the cherem, with the ban. Trade, network, education, and organization. Now, one of the things that you really can learn for the future from the relation Amsterdam-Venice is modeling, and the other one, a word which I realized sitting here in Italy is probably not so popular as it is in American business schools, leadership. But leadership is an important thing to have to run anything, especially a community. And they learned a lot of leadership here. They reinvented it and gave it a new interpretation in Amsterdam, and it definitely came with lessons from here. Now, one of the things that I have to show you is what I was looking after, because a lot of the things I'm telling you are not brand new research. It's things that are generally known. Probably the leadership thing is my own, but I was looking for how far did the influence of the Venetian rabbis go in Amsterdam, and how intensive were the rabbinical relations. And I must honestly say I couldn't find much. But I couldn't find much because that same Eitz Chaim library in Amsterdam, which is a treasure house, and I'm sure that there are treasure houses in this city, which people like Donatella and others try to reveal by having them not just made an inventory, but put on the internet and revealed, will give more. So I had to rely on what has been done already, and I came to a famous case concerning the Curiel family. And it's a nice case. It's not nice if you lived it, but it's a nice case in bringing it back here. The reason I didn't find more is that one of the newest sources found in the Eitz Chaim library, thanks to new research, are the pre-Eitz Chaim, the fruits of Eitz Chaim, and the long, long lists of verdicts, of responsa. Now, responsa is one thing, but the way the Amsterdam community taught their pupils already before the Eitz Chaim school was founded, in which the same Mortera played a big role and Manasseh played a role, is impressive, because they made the pupils exercise. Like if you go to an American business school, I once, as a museum director, had the fun of being for 3 weeks at a special course for museum directors. It is all by case 1, case 2, case 3. And they were far more creative. They made the pupils make up a case. Make up a case, what will happen if someone says, you are the father of this child and you are not, or you want to deny it. Yeah? One of the things. And this brought us to the Curiel case. I go a little bit, I told you this already, so that's good. Here we have Mortera, and here we go to the verdict of the rabbis in this case of David Curiel, alias Lopo Ramirez, and his societal status. The Curiels, for those who don't know, were a famous family are a famous family, especially in the West Indies, but they were very, very instrumental in the building of the Jewish community and the golden age of Amsterdam after the 1650s, after the Peace of Münster, after the end of the war with Spain, when Jerónimo Núñez da Costa, alias Moshe Curiel, became agent of the king in Portugal. That's another thing, that's one of the lessons of the leadership. This man was a leader and he was a diplomat. And what you learn in trade is not only to get rich, but it's to make compromises. And he made the Dutch make a compromise with the Portuguese, leave Brazil, and make sure that you still can trade. It's one of the lessons for Europe, or better for the people who are against Europe, which they could probably found in all of what we are talking about. But Curiel, it was a simple case. There was a woman who claimed that her son was the son of a David Curiel. This happened in the 1650s. And the rabbis in Amsterdam went to Venice to ask advice. And then again, when this was already over, 30 years later, and the little boy was going to marry in the Portuguese synagogue, you had what you call in Ashkenazic, in Yiddish, the Aufruf. Probably some of you know this word. Before you marry, you get an aliyah in the synagogue, same in the Portuguese synagogue, and he wanted to make a memorial prayer for the father that wasn't his father. This, of course, was far too far, and the Portuguese rabbis were actually on his side, while the Parnassim were not. Here we have another thing of leadership, that is the deleting or the dilution of the rabbinical power in favor of the board members of the community. That's why in my former museum in Beit HaTfutzot in Israel, there was this beautiful saying on the wall about the rabbi who doesn't fear his community is not a man, and he's not a rabbi. by Abba Kovna. I paraphrase about it. In any case, Curiel didn't get what he wanted, and the big question is, You see, this is the story. Here you have the name of all the rabbis asked. Most of them are from Venice, but they went much further. They went all around the world, and at the end you see that they also went to Johannes Leusde of Utrecht. They also went to Christians. Now my question in this beautiful case, which ends with this beautiful manuscript in the Rosenthaliana library, is, was it really about the child or not, or was it a way to get a very rich family into trouble? In any case, the very rich family responded with all the legal assistance they have. Imagine you are a simple criminal and you cannot afford a good lawyer. They could afford anything, and in the end they made this beautiful book with all the verdicts, written in a beautiful script by Senior Godinez, famous scribe in Amsterdam. And with King David, the armies have thrown down their weapons, and there's this sentence, half from Birkat Hamazon, from the prayer after the meal, is written on top of it, in it. This is, in fact, what I wanted to tell you. There's much more on the organizational and on the lessons, but the most important lessons is that trade and network brought education and organization and made a strong community modeled after the Venetian one in Amsterdam. Thank you.